All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. So we are continuing in Os Mem Zayin in Tzidkas HaTzaddik. So actually what I'd like to do is skip ahead a little bit. We're going to pick up on page Kuf Yud Beis. So page Kuf Yud Beis on the right hand side. Well, we'll look at it on the in the Be'orei HaChasidus. So in the Chasidus, it's the left hand column. So we'll say continuing in the same theme. In the same theme. So HaTzaddik writes very beautifully. He says, V'zeh der al derech mashapiresh Chazal. He says this theme that we've been discussing, namely, that every ratzon, every desire, and every koach, and every strength, and every midah, every character trait can be good and can be bad. It can be good if used for the, we'll call it actualization of the Ratzon Hashem, the will of Hashem, and it can be bad, chas v'shalom, if it's used to counter the will of Hashem, to counter the Ratzon Hashem. Supposed to say this is so beautiful. Look what he writes over here. So he quotes over here the pasuk in the pasuk in Zechariah that says, "Bayomahu yigdal hamispeid b'Yerushalayim." On that day, there will be a great eulogy in Yerushalayim. So also we've seen this Gemara, of course, in our Daf Yomi journeys as well. And the Gemara Masechah Sukkah explains, Ba'avdan hayetzahara gamkein. This is referring ultimately again to when Mashiach comes. We also listen to this. When Mashiach comes, there's going to be a huge levaya, accompanied by a huge eulogy. Levaya for who? Eulogy for who? For the Yetzirah. For the Yetzirah, the evil inclination is going to be slaughtered, and there's going to be a great eulogy. Lefishita Chazal lefishita achos shahesped agad lahu ye al harigas shalayetzer hara. That ultimately, again, the levaya is going to be for the death, for the slaughter of the Yetzer Hara. Va'pi pshuto lo muvan. So as HaTzaddik, the pasuk doesn't make sense. Why? He says, Shelichora roi hayalahem lismoach ma'od al davar zeh. I don't understand. The Navi makes it sound like when Mashiach comes, there's going to be this great levaya. And when I say great, I mean large. There's going to be eulogies. The picture that the Navi is describing is a picture of sadness, right? When you hear eulogy, so again, that conjures up, understandably so, feelings of sadness, levaya, feelings of loss, sadness. Says HaTzaddik, sadness. The Yetzirah is going to be shechted, the Yetzirah is going to be slaughtered, there's going to be a levaya for the Yetzirah. There should be singing and dancing. Should be an incredible cause for simcha. Why is there going to be a gathering of sadness for the quote-unquote death of the Yetzirah? And HaTzaddik says something so profound. He says, Ella, Kiyamru Chazal, because Chazal said, Yafesh Shah Achas B'tshuva U'maisim Tovim Ba'olam Hazeh Mikol Chaye Olam Haba. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, one moment of tshuva and good deeds in this world is more important than the entire afterlife. What's the pshat? V'atam l'kachu shu makom hishtatlos v'habechira mikach hayetzir hara hasholed bo va'olam haba nikre yomim she'ein bahem chayves. So we'll say this is actually quite a profound idea. So HaTzaddik explains it's very simple. What does it mean when Chazal say that one moment of tshuva and maisim tovim in this world is better than an entire olam haba? So we'll say, what's olam haba? Olam haba is the place where you go to reap the benefits of the life you lived. That is, it's almost like Olam Haba's collecting interest, right? You invest money in the bank, you could go ahead and collect interest. Now, of course, the greater the principal, the greater the amount of interest. That principle is the life you led. That principle are the good deeds you did. That principle is the chesed you performed. So HaTzaddik says something, that's what Chazal say, one moment of life in this world is better than an entire afterlife, an entire olam haba. And the logic, says HaTzaddik, is very simple. Because this place, using his words, is the makom hishtatlus and bechira. This is the place where you could affect change. This is the place where you can accomplish things. In this world, you have the ability to put in effort. You have the ability to make choices. Why do you have the ability to make choices? Where does your koach ha-bechira, where does the power to choose correctly emanate from? Reb Tzaddik says that is directly rooted in the Yetzer Hara. In other words, it's the fact that I have a Yetzer Hara that endows me with the koach habechira, with the koach to choose. Right? Without a Yetzer Hara, there's no real koach habechira. There's no real choice. He goes on, va'olam haba, nikra yomim she'in ba'im chayfetz. Interestingly enough, olam haba is often referred to as a world in which there is no choice, or in which there is no desire. Ki az yivur ha-Yetzer Hara, v'ruach hatoma, ve'im makom l'ra, ve'im makom gam la'asagas hamasikas lios chayfetz v'choshech. Because remember, what does it mean that olam haba is olam she'in ba'im chayfetz? It's a world in which there is no desire, a world in which there is no choice. So remember again, it's a very simple yisod. What he's saying is that in olam haba there's no bechira. There's no bechira. Why is there no bechira? There's no bechira because at the end of the day there's no Yetzer Hara. You can't have free will if there are not opposing forces to choose from. So again, if in olam haba there's no bechira, if olam haba there's no Yetzer Hara, so by definition there's no bechira. And if there's no bechira, if there's no free choice, then at the end of the day there is no accrual of schar. Then at the end of the day you don't really rack up any points, right? There's no points for good behavior if there's nothing bad to choose from. He goes on, v'lachem. So therefore we'll say now we understand the pasuk in Zechariah. So what does Zechariah say? You know, when Mashiach comes, we'll say this is one of the interesting facets of the Messianic era. That when Mashiach comes, there's not going to be a Yetzer Hara. Then we'll say, now what does that mean? What does that mean? That means a person, no one's ever going to sin, right? No one's ever going to make mistakes, wrong choices. So remember, when the Navi describes the absence of a Yetzer Hara in Olam Haba, what he's in the Messianic era, what he's really referring to is that when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a certain clarity which exists in the world. In other words, one of the reasons why we commit chet, and one of the reasons why we make mistakes, is because at the end of the day, we still live in a world of ambiguity. Sometimes, again, do I see Hashem? Do I not see Hashem? Is there emotional? So there is some element of fog. I'll call it theological fog with which we exist. And therefore says Reb Tzaddik, when Mashiach comes, that fog is dispersed. There's absolute clarity about the existence of the Ribbon Shalom. That's what it means when it refers to the absence of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is no longer here, it's removed because there's clarity. So of course, can you make mistakes in the Yemos HaMashiach? Of course you can. Because if you can't make mistakes, but it's much more improbable to make a mistake. That's what the Navi is lamenting. I will say, isn't this an incredible thing? So the Navi is lamenting the fact that when Mashiach comes, on one hand we say, what? Like we saw just a couple, we saw 2 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago we saw that Gemara. Right? On that day, a reference to the Messianic era, the world will recognize the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Isn't that incredible? It is incredible. But amazingly enough, there's something that's going to be lost. There's a Yetzer Hara that's lost. And with the loss of that Yetzer Hara becomes a certain loss of potential growth as well. Isn't this an incredible yisod? So I'll just tell you something very interesting. We'll come back to HaTzaddik in just a moment. Using this logic also, remember, we generally live with the principle, Rebbe's principle of Shuv Yom Echad Lifnei Nisasecha. Right? Go ahead and repent one day before you die. And of course, the obvious corollary to that, I never know when I'm going to die, and therefore I have to spend all of my days in Shuvah. It turns out, Rabosai, that it's not just about death. It's also Shuv Yom Echad Lifnei Bias Mashiach. Make sure you also do Shuvah before Mashiach comes. Because when Mashiach comes, things change. The ability to grow changes. The ability to do tshuva, everything changes. And since with Mashiach, achak elo b'chol yom sheyavo, right? Ani imamin be'emuna shalema, I believe that he could come any day. So again, also that creates a mandate for tshuva now, not just pre-death, because that's always a little bit morose. Not always pre-death, but pre-messianic arrival, something that we eagerly anticipate and pine for each and every day. A person has to go ahead and have and have their affairs in order, because as we see, the Koach HaBechira changes with the arrival of Mashiach. But finishing this up in a Tzaddik's model, he goes on, he says, Ve'ein makom l'ra, ve'ein makom gam fine. Lochein, yifku yitztaru v'yispadu ma'od al avdan yitzhara. So it says, now we understand it. The people, when Mashiach comes, and the Yitzhara, so to speak, is slaughtered, and there's a great levaya, people are going to cry. People are going to cry. Why? Va'az la'asad lavu ya'avdan kol kochos hanefesh shemitzatu bichlal v'lachin yigdal hamispeid. See, I will say, with the death of the Yitzhara, it's true, comes the death of a lot of propensity to sin. But with that, HaTzaddik also posits, dies a lot of koach, a lot of our kochos. Because as he said before, as HaTzaddik said before, that ultimately, again, with every sin is the result of a particular koach. But the koach itself is not bad. The koach itself, the energy itself, is just misdirected. But with the death of the Yetzirah, ultimately again comes the death of a certain element of growth, and comes the death of certain kochos. He goes on, he says, "Va'amnam gamba avdan eza uma pratis mina olam yesh li Yisrael malikoni l'tztar shuhu ibud memshal zazchar." So again, the part that we skipped was Reb Tzaddik applied this to the nations of the world, which again we just don't need for our central theme. But I will say, understand that Reb Tzaddik is saying over here, this fits into his theme dramatically amazing. So Reb Tzaddik has been telling us this entire time that Lamaisa, there's no such thing as good kochos, bad kochos, good midos, bad midos. There's just energy that's applied correctly and energy that's applied incorrectly. That's what life is all about. And ein example gedola mizu, ein dugma gedola mizu with the Yetzirah. You say to yourself, mourning over the death of the Yetzirah, that's great. That's a simcha, that's parade worthy. We'll say even the Yetzirah is not necessarily so bad. What do I mean by that? That also everything depends on how you use your Yetzirah. When a person just only uses the Yetzirah for the sake of sin, that's bad. But when the Yetzirah itself becomes a catalyst for growth, which it is so very often, and those kochos which the Yetzirah represent, or the Yetzirah often corrupts, this is really the clinch that Reb Tzaddik is saying. The Yetzirah corrupts kochos. It corrupts kochos. That's what it does. It takes energy and it takes those characteristics that I have, and it corrupts it and takes it in the wrong direction. Well, with the death of the Yetzirah, Tzaddik posits, also becomes the death of many of those kochos. And that's what Klal Yisrael mourns. Because the death of kochos is never good. Right? The death of kochos means, yes, of course, there'll be some loss of the ability to sin, which may be good, but the death of those kochos also represents the death or the inability to accomplish certain great things as well. So whereas the Messianic era will represent a curtailment of negative sinful activity, it will also on a certain level represent a loss of potential dynamic positive activity as well. So an incredible Yisrael, we'll continue Meretz Hashem with Osmem Zayin tomorrow.